know that a big part of their success is that luck/God factor that I talked about before. And I deal with people on Wall Street. I deal with lots of people who are billionaires, and hedge fund guys, others that, and the ones that really are true with themselves will all tell you that. They'll build factories, build cars. I've met people all over the world, and I've had that conversation with them over the years, and it's very, very important. And finally, one of the lessons I learned is that tzedakah is really an important part of your life. Even when I was having great difficulties, and I'm going to tell you about it in a moment, I always knew it was important that you had to give because there were always people who had less and less fortunate, and that the more you give, my father always said, the more you give, you got to give what you can, the more you'll be rewarded. And it's been absolutely right. In the end, it almost feels like it doesn't cost you anything. And you gain much more from it than it costs you. And that's not a reason in and of itself. That seems to be just what I've learned. I told you these are the lessons. So let's talk a little bit about who I am and where I've come. And I grew up in California, and in Southern California. I was born in Orange County. It's nothing like the television show, at least the life I had. I went to high school and graduated and came to the East Coast. I went to George Washington University. And I wanted to see something different. And I always worked. I got a job starting in high school. First job, I worked on a construction site cleaning up debris. And I kept that job in the summers and on holidays. And I got to know the managers of the company, and I was telling them things that one of the guys was interested enough. He wasn't exactly a mentor, but he said, why don't you come in and one of the days a week, I'll let you work with the finance guy, and he'll give you a bigger understanding of what we're doing here. You seem like a bright, ambitious young person. I was about 14. And I learned about when I was about 16, I got to that opportunity, and I learned about how buildings were financed and how banks made loans and that. And I saw them building these buildings, and I thought I knew a lot about construction and development. So when I came to Washington and went to school, it was 1980, and Jimmy Carter was just leaving office, and Ronald Reagan was just coming in about halfway through my first year, and we were suffering great inflation, and the real estate market was going in, and there was a lot of apartment buildings that were being taken over by the banks. And I picked up the Washington Post one day right before I was coming home for winter break, back up to California, and there was an article about how one of the banks there that no longer itself exists was foreclosing on all of these buildings and how they had all these bad loans. And I picked up the paper, and I was going to take it home and read it on the plane, and I was going to have my dad try to explain to me, he's a doctor, but he try to explain to me, he was a businessman as well, but and I was sitting on the plane, and as fortuitous as would happen, and won't use luck, but as but as would have it, a real estate lawyer was sitting next to me on the plane. And I asked him, we started talking, and I pulled out of my bag this article, and I said, well, you're in real estate, and I said, can you explain this to me? And he looked at it, and he said, sure, and he started explaining. And I said, gee, if they're going to go under, why aren't the banks making deals? The condo buildings that there were apartments, they're turning them into condominiums, they're selling them to the people that live in it for half the price, and they're willing to sell it to an outsider. It's called a condo conversion. You've seen these in big cities, and this is a big thing on the East Coast. They protected the apartment renters from losing their homes, so they get a chance to buy it at a lower price if they don't build it out themselves. Most of them created situations where the apartment would create an association and build them themselves. Anyway, they were going broke, and they wouldn't sell them at the lower price to outsiders. And I sat there and started thinking about this, that opportunity in Christ. I said, I bet I could find lawyers, doctors, Washington, everybody needs a tax shelter in those days. I said, I'll bet you I could go out and find people if they'll sell them to me at the insider price. And this lawyer was the singularly least ambitious guy I ever met in my life. He said, well, if you can do that, I'll be happy to close the loans for you. He could have gone and said, we could do this together. You can do it. I'll put the whole thing together. I'm in college. I don't even know what I'm doing. And he said, I'll close the loans are, like $200 a piece or something. So I thought about it, and I went to these condo boards, and I was able to convince them if I could find people in bulk, they would sell them to me at the inside price, and they agreed. And I cleaned out some buildings while I was in my second year of college, and found doctors, lawyers, and others who did it, and you could get loans, except they were about 18%, really high interest rates. Sold these buildings out, I got a piece, I helped them rent them, all while going through GW in 3 years. And ultimately rates came down, and all these apartments got sold, and it was a good thing. So it was the first time, and I took what I didn't even, I didn't, sometimes you have enough knowledge it could be dangerous. So I then parlayed that. I got out of GW after 3 years, and you don't always get what you want. I wanted to go to the University of Pennsylvania to work in school. I got a wait list, I didn't get in. So I went to GW, it's a good school, studied politics, but got a degree in finance, and did this and went through in 3 years. So I just focused myself, didn't wallow in that I didn't get into my first choice, and made something good out of it, and persisted. With that, I was very disappointed. I was able to then take that supposed expertise now in real estate, and they had deregulated the banking system under Ronald Reagan, and they were already seeing the beginnings of you just lived through a banking crisis you've all heard about. It was a banking crisis that began, or really showed itself in 1989, but its seeds were really more about 1982. And by 1983, they were already seeing problems because they deregulated the banking industry, but didn't understand that if you give people insured deposits, you go to the bank and seeing FDIC insurance on the door, well, the government will protect the investor up to the depositor of a bank up to a certain level, but they deregulated. They let owners of banks invest in anything they wanted, not just making loans to businesses or making loans on homes. They let, particularly savings and loans, invest in anything they wanted to. And you had Florida savings loans, state ones generally, Florida, Texas, California, a few other places where they went berserk. They invested in junk bonds, if you know what those are. They invested in horse racing tracks, Wendy's franchises, you name it, we used to see it in these banks. And I was able to parlay the real estate expertise into a job at what was called Deloitte Haskins and Sells now, which then was called Deloitte & Touche. Deloitte Haskins and Sells was one of the largest of the 8 accounting firms in the world, and they had a big consulting group. And I got hired into their bank consulting group because they were having problems with bank, and I was able to convince them that I had an expertise on turning around real estate because of what I described before. And I went to work there for 2.5 years, and I learned from people the merger and acquisitions of banks, and we were advising lots of insurance companies and others in buying failing banks and savings and loans from the government. And I had a boss, unfortunately, though, and I got moved from the Washington office to the Philadelphia region, which handled, was really the New York region that was based in Philadelphia. And I had a boss who was an IT specialist in the firm, the bank IT systems, big mainframes in those days. And he didn't understand half of what we were saying. And I can remember sitting in his office, and he was in this chair, props here. And I was describing how we were going to solve a problem with one of the banks selling off some of its branch locations to another bank that we would absorb them and you could get a good price and we could get the bank recapitalized. And his face, this happened 3 times, the same type of thing. I described it like this. His face would turn red, and you'd watch it turning red. And he'd get up in his office, his partner, and he'd slowly close the door in an exaggerated fashion. He'd sit down and he'd say, Lewis, never say that at the client. But he didn't understand what I was saying. And after the 3rd time he did it, I convinced a relatively young new partner in the firm that I could raise money just like I did when I was doing those real estate deals. I said, we can go out and buy some of these banks ourselves, turn them around, and in the meantime, we can do this kind of investment banking work. And I convinced a new partner who probably filled 3,000 hours that year, and they didn't give him a bonus. I got to move this along here because we're running out of time. But I left, I started a company, and we used to buy failed banks from the government. And while buying failed banks, why were they failed? They had a lot of bad loans, all these things I was describing before. I developed an expertise in working out loans. I had everything from the traditional real estate. I had planned unit developments, meaning around golf course, housing developments here in Florida. I had condo buildings in Texas. I had 2 hotels in Hawaii, all 1 year, and one of the banks took over. I had a 3-state Dairy Queen franchise I turned around. That was an easy one. The guy went to prison for not paying his taxes. But so you just stopped stealing from the cash register, and that turned around and sold that. It was in the Midwest. I had metal stamping plants and plastic injection molding. And my career didn't kind of go the direction I had thought it was going, because I always thought I would go into manufacturing. But beginning of my career, manufacturing was going out of vogue in this country because it was much less expensive to start manufacturing overseas, like China. Now China, in my career, China now is becoming a high-cost operator, and with all the energy that's being suddenly found the last few years in the United States, with shale oil and fracking that's going on, and finding oil and natural gas, manufacturing may be coming back. But I would